Hello and welcome to the COMMnections webinar series, brought to you by the Master of Arts in Communication program and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features a discussion with Crystal Board on how to create diverse, equitable, and inclusive PR efforts. My name is Peter Huggins, and I am the event producer. Please note, today's event will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the COMMnections playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we'll answer as many questions as possible during the latter portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the event to our moderator, Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Assistant Program Director and Senior Lecturer for the Master of Arts in Communication program.
Thank you, Peter. And welcome everyone. I'm glad you could join us. I'm actually posting from 555 Pennsylvania Avenue. My class is here, so you can't see any of them, but I appreciate you all joining. And thank you so much, Crystal, for agreeing to participate in this. So Crystal is Vice President and the DEI at Vanguard Communication, and she is going to share all her experience and knowledge with us.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez, and hello, everybody. Just give me 1 minute. I'm going to go and pull up my slide deck for today for our conversation. Okay, great. So I'm so excited to be here to talk about this topic. DEI communications is something that I love doing, but also I think is so important for us as professional communicators, regardless of what our roles are in organizations moving forward. And so I'm really excited to have this opportunity to talk with you today, to talk really focus about how to create diverse, equitable, and inclusive PR efforts that engage rather than divide. And I think that's kind of an important aspect, especially in the world that we're in right now. So before I get in, I wanted just to share a little bit about me, but let's take a moment. I want everyone to just kind of center yourself. If you're sitting somewhere, maybe putting your feet on the ground to kind of ground yourself. Talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, even in professional settings, can be sometimes difficult and triggering because a lot of the issues that we're going to talk about are very personal to us, right? And so, yes, we might come at it from a professional standpoint, but we're still individuals. We still carry multiple identities that influence us and influence the way we see the world. And so I just want to take a moment. Just take a deep breath. There's a lot of things happening in the world right now that are influencing how we feel in this moment. And so I just want to honor that and take that beat. One more deep breath. Okay, great. So as Dr. Hernandez mentioned, my name is Crystal Board. My pronouns are she, her. I am an African-American woman. I have curly black hair, and I'm wearing glasses and a brightly patterned blue and yellow jacket with a blue dress. I am a vice president at Vanguard Communications. We are a PR firm based in Washington, D.C., where all of our clients are either nonprofit organizations, government agencies, associations, and foundations. So basically, we're focused on social change, social issue work, which is really, really exciting. I've been at Vanguard. It will be 17 years in January. So I've been there for a very long time. And for the last 6 or 7 years of my time there, I've been focusing on building and expanding out our DEI practice. And there's a lot of organizations that do DEI work that look at it at an organizational level. That is not the service that we offer. What we offer is using our public relations and communications expertise with a DEI framework to provide counsel to organizations that are looking at their communications and how DEI fits into that, right? And so that's kind of the source of what we do. I love to start my presentations with a photograph. I'm an amateur photographer. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, you're more than welcome to. This is one of my favorite photos I've ever taken. I took it here in the Washington, D.C. area. It is a close-up of the hands of the Iwo Jima Marine Corps Memorial that's in Arlington, Virginia. And I start with this image for these conversations because I think this is what, to me, DEI communications is about. It's about how do we bring all of these different individuals and their hands up to accomplish a goal. And in the case of this moment in history, it was to raise a flag on the top of Iwo Jima during that battle. But for a lot of us in whatever organizations we work in, we are faced with challenges and opportunities to communicate that require us to look around the room and see who needs to bring their hands into the mix and offer their expertise and perspective. So there's 3 things I hope that we accomplish today in our time together. First, I'm going to talk about what People First is and why audiences should be at the center of effective PR campaigns. I want you to walk away understanding how effective audience inclusion strategies within that DEI framework can apply throughout the entirety of a campaign and not just in one component of it. And then finally, I'm going to share some approaches for how to collaborate and engage with audiences, particularly ones that come from what we would define as overburdened communities or underrepresented communities, and how to bring them in as partners and how to avoid the divisive strategies such as tokenism and unconscious bias. Okay, great. So what is People First? What do I mean when I say that, right? So how we define People First is placing the intended audience at the center of PR and communication efforts to be more inclusive, respectful, representative, and effective, right? And that's not to say that when we think about strategic communications planning, we talk about the audience, right? But do we really put them in the middle of all the other questions that we ask in that process? And we're going to talk about that a little bit as we go on. But at the core of what People First is this slogan that was made popular during the disability rights advocacy movement in the 1970s. And it was nothing about us without us. And it's a slogan that a lot of other civil rights movements have taken on because it is all about that you can't talk about an issue or circumstance or an environment that impacts me without involving me in that conversation, right? That the people who are at the center of experiencing the benefits, the consequences, the challenges, whatever they happen to be, should be involved and at the table, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we bring those individuals to the table as part of our work. So hopefully this diagram looks familiar to you, that you've talked about the strategic communications planning process, you've used it in whatever organizations that you've worked in as a communicator. But basically that, we build a process where we start with a communications goal, and then we build audience, message, channels, the activities, events, materials, pre-testing and implementation, and finally evaluation, also very important. But oftentimes when we talk about audience engagement, this is the bucket that everyone focuses on, right? And it's like, okay, well, when we get to audience, then we'll talk about how we engage them or how we include them, or maybe not even talking about how we engage and include them. It's all about reaching and not about a two-way dialogue. From my vantage point as a DEI communications expert, I think we should be talking about audience everywhere, right? At every single phase of our planning. So when we're thinking about our communication goal, we should be thinking about our audience. We should be thinking about them in our messages, the channels, and seeing if there are opportunities in each of those phases to actually involve the audience themselves in working with us, in shaping some of the concepts that we develop in each of these phases. So before we get any further, I want to talk about the second part of my title for today, which is the, engaging rather than dividing. And I think this is a really important conversation, especially in the world that we're in right now. And so before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about some key phrases so that we're all speaking the same language. So first, diversity, equity, inclusion. What does that mean? I love Verna Myers, who's a fantastic DEI advisor and strategist. She just counseled Netflix and has now started her own company. She says diversity is receiving an invitation to a dance, equity is possessing the resources to attend, and inclusion is being asked to dance. And that's what we're talking about today, is really focusing on how do we ask people to partner with us, to dance with us, to work with us. So what is inclusion? Inclusion is the practice that ensures that individuals, regardless of their identity, feels welcome, respected, supported, valued, and able to fully participate and be heard within organizations, groups, and communities, right? An inclusive, welcoming culture or community embraces differences and offers respect in words and actions for all people, and fosters a diversity of thought, ideas, perspectives, and values. I always read that whole definition because I think every single word that's part of it is really an important thing and shouldn't be glossed over, right? So inclusion is, and to be fair, it's hard to include everybody, right? But what we want to try is to do inclusion that minimizes harm. So as much as we can to try to create campaigns, strategies, approaches that makes our audience feel like they are being welcomed, or hopefully have a seat at our conversation tables, as opposed to sending out signals that may make them feel like they are not included and not valued and not heard. And representation is an important part of that, right? So representation is the part that I think we have to do a lot, where we're creating spaces and opportunities and conversations where those audience members feel included and can provide us their own insights and ideas and feedback, because their experience is expertise. Their experience about themselves, about the communities in which they identify, can add and give us so much intelligence about how to shape the goals, the strategies, the messages that we want to create around our PR efforts. And it should always be two-way. It shouldn't be a one-way conversation where we're pushing information, like that's where that reach part is, and we're not creating spaces for them to represent their perspectives and voices as well. So what are some of the things we have to keep in mind when we're trying to engage communities, right? So we need to think about all the factors and influences that go into making you who you are and me who I am, and who are individuals within the audiences we're trying to reach, what is influencing them. And so this is a great graphic to kind of show, you know, the person in the middle and look at all the different things that are influencing them. You know, it could be things that they are learning within their family structures, in their communities and neighborhoods. It could be things that are like cultural norms and learnings, right? Things that are bigger, the society's perceptions of things. It could be history, right? Things that have happened in the past to that community. And it can also be the systems and structures, those institutions that have influence in shaping our experiences and who we are and how we look at the world. And also, we have to acknowledge that there have been inequities, there have been disparities, there have been injustices. And I think one of the greatest ways to talk about this is talking about the difference between equality, equity, and justice. So there's a lot of people that talk about equality, where everyone gets the same thing. But the truth is that not everyone is in the same position, right? Who have had the same opportunities, that have experienced maybe systems, structures, policies that have restricted what opportunities were available to them. So what we're really striving for is equity. It's equity acknowledges those inequities and says, okay, we're going to give you what you need in order to be able to, in this case, in the illustration, see over the fence, right? That everyone can see over the fence, that everyone has the same opportunities to be successful and to thrive. And justice, which is going to take us a very long time to get to, but the concept of justice is there's no fence at all. Or if there is a fence, everybody can see through it, and they don't necessarily need those resources we gave them in the equity phase to still be able to see through the fence from their vantage point. And the last thing we have to consider is all of these intersecting identities. Talking about intersectionality is becoming very important in DEI communications work in particular. It started in the legal space as a term that was coined to say that if you were a Black woman, that you can't be considered by the law of just looking at those experiences as separate, that being Black and being a woman intersect, and you have a very specific experience because you are Black and a woman. And that's the same thing with, we have to think about our audiences and communications, is they are coming into our world and into our work with all of these different identities, right? And I'm sure you could look at this and see how you would categorize yourself and identify as yourself. You know, the ones in the middle circle are kind of those core identities that have a great influence about our world experience and how we see the world. But the ones on the outer circle also can influence and intersect with those core identities and influence who we are. So giving a contemplation to all of these things can be really helpful. And when we're doing that analysis phase of our audience, before we even start approaching them about collaboration. So what are the things that we need to be thinking about? What are those questions we should be asking ourselves as we can start to do more consideration about the audiences we want to reach? We need to take an account of the personal, cultural, systemic, and structural challenges that influence their behavior change. And oftentimes this means you have to actually have a conversation with your audience or members of that audience in order to get these answers, because what you presume is the answer may not be the answer. And so the only way to really know is to ask the audience themselves. So you need to ask them, what are your needs? What are your motivations? What would be your benefits to change, right? Or to adopt this behavior change or call to action? What are the barriers that you're experiencing for that change? I remember one time we were working on a project that we needed to convene a focus group of Latina mothers who spoke Spanish. And the firm we were working with was having a lot of difficulty recruiting. And because we were planning to hold the focus group in the evening, and they just weren't getting people to commit. And so we were working with a community partner, and we went to the community partner and saying, you know, is there something we could be offering that would be helpful and help people come and engage? And the community partner, who understood this community really well, said, you know, these are women that don't have childcare. So the reason they're not saying yes to this focus group in the evening is because they don't have someone to watch their kids. So we provided childcare so that they could come to the focus group and bring their children, and that while they're in the focus group, they had somebody who was licensed, you know, to watch their children. And we were able to get the number of people we needed for the focus group. So you don't really know unless you ask to kind of determine what those benefits and barriers are, which can be very pivotal in the success of that kind of engagement. So let's talk about the polarized environment, right? The engaging rather than dividing. So there are a lot of divisions that are existing. And, you know, the polarization index was something that the University of Southern California developed over the course of 2 years. They tracked these issue areas, and through looking at media coverage as well as some audience engagement, we're able to kind of see where, like, you know, right-leaning perspectives and left-leaning perspectives felt about these issues. And so these were the results of the final quarter of 2022. And as you can see, there's not much we are in balanced agreement on, right, from those two different political perspectives. And so we are in a very polarized space. And so really figuring out and having a deeper understanding of our audiences is going to help us navigate those waters more successfully, and knowing kind of the ways that we can communicate with them, but also where we place them in the seats of influence. So I think most people think when you're sitting at a table, so if you walk into a conference room, or maybe even your dining room, right? Your family dining room table, you think that where influence resides is the people that sit at the ends of the table, right? But the truth is, the influence is really in the center of the table. So this is also good, like when you're going to dinner parties and things and you want to talk to a lot of people, try for the seats in the center as opposed to the seats at the end, because those are the people that are going to be able to communicate more thoroughly with everyone across the table. And that's where we need to be thinking as communicators, right? And thinking about our audience. I love this continuum of change graphic, where it looks like where you place your audience on that continuum of change of understanding the action you want them to take or the topic that you want them to have awareness of. And so the goal is, if you put it over that table, the people we want to reach are in the middle. We can't be thinking about those far end polarized sides. We need to kind of focus our resources on the people that have a basic understanding, the people that are already interested, and the people who are already primed to take action, those desire to learn more folks, right? And thinking about that in the scheme of this kind of polarized audience conversation can really help you zero into the people that's going to be the most helpful to what you want to accomplish, especially if you have limited time and resources. All right, so we've talked about the situation that we're communicating in, the environment that we're in. It's tricky and divided. We've talked about, the considerations we have to have in mind about what our audiences are feeling and experiencing, how they identify, and the many ways they might identify, and those ways intersect. So now we have this deep understanding, and we want to bring them into our strategic communication planning process. How do we do that? Well, I like to think of it as a dance. And full disclosure, I did a lot of dance classes in my childhood. I did ballet for 10 years and tap for 11. So this is my language, but I think that it works really well as an analogy for kind of understanding how we can do authentic audience inclusion in our communications work. So you can always dance by yourself, but it's always more fun to dance with someone. And so that is the concept here too. We are looking for successful campaigns. How can we do that? We're going to need to partner with our audience, with other organizations that work with our audience, in order to bolster the possibility of the success of our work. So there's 4 steps. The first step is awareness. This is when you show up and imagine yourself at, a dance. Maybe in high school you might have experienced it, or recently with friends at a club. You go in and you kind of start by just kind of seeing who's there, right? So how do we do that? First, you need to assess the factors influencing identities, such as systemic, structural, racial, and cultural influences, those things that we talked about earlier, using those different illustrations. You need to be conscious of your own implicit bias as you're doing that scan, right? And this is really important. I think that a lot of people feel very stigmatized and triggered when there's words with ism at the end of it and being called ist. And the truth is, all of us have bias. I'm a woman of color. I have bias. You have bias. Everyone has bias. The difference is being able to be aware of your bias and be able to counteract it in the situations that it requires it to be counteracted, right? So having some consciousness, and it takes a lot of work, right? That's a lot of introspection work to go into and thinking about our different identities, how those identities have influenced us and shaped the way that we see the world, right? And I think at like a base level, we lean a lot and blame a lot on pop culture, but the truth is we get so much of our bias from the people in our lives, the communities we grew up in, the experiences that we've had. So all of that is there, and being conscious of that is going to make you much more successful in your audience engagement and inclusion. And then you want to also do some work about your understanding and deepening your understanding of how your identity shapes you, as well as how it shapes your audiences, right? So it's not just work that you need to do about understanding them. It is super valuable as a communicator to understand yourself too, especially when you're doing this work. And it takes some effort, and it's not an easy road, but it adds so much value. I feel like because I've done that work personally for myself, I add so much more value to the communications work that I do and the counsel that I'm able to provide clients, because I have that deepening understanding of identities, especially within myself and other audiences. All right, second step is about engagement, right? So you've assessed the room, You figured out who is there, why they might be there, asking maybe those questions, need, motivation, benefits, barriers, right, to get a better understanding of what they're experiencing. And now it's time for you to invite them to dance with you. So you want them to be involved from the beginning, if at all possible, right? The value of this is that you get the benefit of their insights and their lived experiences right from the beginning. There's nothing more challenging than coming up with a plan, and then you start talking to the audience and then realizing, wow, we are going completely in the wrong direction, or the things that we have in here is not going to work. I will say that as from an agency standpoint, if we were to develop a plan like that for a paying client, they would be highly, highly annoyed with us because we wasted that investment. So if and when possible, try to bring the audience in the beginning, having those conversations very early in the planning process. And then engage them as counsel, right? And figuring out if there are kind of formal roles or leadership opportunities like advisory councils, ambassador programs, leadership summits, call it whatever you like, but give them a role where they can really serve as audience counselors. And I put this in italics, and you'll see that in the slide, audience counselors, because that's what I call them, right? But you could call them something different. But I think people feel so much more empowered when they feel like they have a very clear role and a role to play in the work, that it feels two-directional. And sometimes providing that formality and titles and roles can be really help do that. Right. So step 3 is you've figured out who your audience counselors are going to be. You've invited them to collaborate. They've said yes, hooray. So now it's about collaboration. And this is the hard part, because this is about following their lead. We like to think that we set the pace, we set the tone as the professional communicators, right? We set the plan. And so why isn't it everyone following our lead? But if we really want to do authentic audience engagement, we need to create that conversation back and forth where we're getting their insights and we're taking them seriously. So the steps here are gather and listen regularly to their insights. So don't talk to them once, have one conversation and be like, check box and move on. Think about where are there other moments and times within the structure of what you're doing in order to engage those individuals as counselors, right? If you're giving them a role, communicate very clearly what the role is, what the responsibilities, what your expectations are of them, right? How much time is this going to require of them? And especially if we're working with, communities that might be classified as overburdened, they're already getting asked to do a lot and carrying a lot of water. So think through, are there ways that they can be engaged, but it's not huge time commitment for them? Or extensive in labor. So think through that and then communicate what those expectations are. And then whenever possible, record, reference, and share their comments and recommendations in planning documents and messaging platforms and meeting minutes and style guides in these formal documented places. Why do we do that? We do that because everyone wants to feel heard. And when people are able to see their content, their words captured, it makes them feel that what they are saying is being heard. What takes it to the next level is not only did you capture it, but you tried to act upon it, right? You integrated their ideas, their thoughts, their insights into the actual work. That even gives further validation of why it's valuable to them to give you their time, to give you their perspective, to share their experiences with you, which actually could be a really difficult emotional thing for them to do, to open up and be vulnerable in that way. So find ways of helping reinforce that what they are contributing is valued and appreciated. And then finally, seek guidance from audience counselors on all aspects of campaign messaging strategies and tactics and evaluation. So imagining that strategic communications planning circle in your mind, remember my arrows, like try to find in all of those moments in that plan as you develop it, as you implement it, as you evaluate it, of where could those audience counselors play a role, right? And integrate them into that process. And finally, it's about evaluation. And this is, in the dance analogy, listening and adjusting to the rhythm, right? So you have a plan, you're implementing it, and you need to be thinking, okay, is this going the way we want them to go, right? Is this working, right? Are we achieving the goals and the objectives that we set out, that maybe we discussed in conversation with our audience counselors? Like, is this happening? Is it working right? And so you want to be open to feedback. You want to ask for feedback from those audience counselors during the campaign as much as possible. Now, I want to say full disclosure, as you know, someone who works with nonprofit organizations and government agencies, I understand the restrictions of budgets, right? Sometimes budgets don't allow us the privilege of being able to do this much dynamic work with our audiences. So what we have to do is try to do some of it, right? At least trying to attempt to find those moments where we can integrate some of it, maybe not all of it, into our work is good. And so bringing them in the evaluation phase can be a really effective way of figuring out if there's mid-course corrections that need to be made and what they might be that can improve the success of the campaign that you're creating and implementing. It also, in the evaluation phase, helps you verify your audience counselor's feedback before implementing. This is really important, and this is why it's like good to not speak to a focus group of one person from your audience. It's good to have multiple audience counselors, so then you can really get a sense and vet whether there are insights that should be integrated into the work and those adjustments made, or it might be that singular person's perspective or opinion, as opposed to kind of something that might be shared by the larger community. So verifying the information is also really important. And then once you get that information, you verified it, you want to adjust and correct based on those insights and suggestions. The goal of all of our communications work is always about achieving that communications goal and objective that we set at the beginning, right? We want to achieve those things. We want to reach the audiences that we hope to reach. We want to prepare the messages that are going to be the most effective in engaging them to build awareness or take an action or whatever our communications goal happened to be. And so making those adjustments, hopefully in real time, will improve the success that you'll have in that work. And also help you in real time make adjustments on the way that you're engaging with that audience, right? Because maybe there's something that's not working. Maybe there's something that is missing the mark and reaching the specific type of people that you're trying to reach. And so making those adjustments in real time will kind of increase the probability of success for the work that you're doing. And then be really transparent with your audience counselors. If things are going really well, share those successes. If things are not going well, share those challenges as well, because they may have some insights on how you can adjust and correct, right? Or explain why that is the reaction to that information, to that resource, to the event that you're trying to get people to attend. So be open and transparent. We're not always going to hit it out of the park every time, right? We're going to need to make adjustments. And so being open to those conversations is really important with our audience counselors. So once we've engaged them, how can they help us, right? These audience counselors. They can help us determine how to best segment and reach our intended audiences. So everyone wants to reach the general public, right? But the truth is, those are not, general public is not always going to be the people that help us achieve our goal. So the people that help us achieve the goal are the people that are connected and have, an investment in the thing that we're trying to achieve. And so audience counselors can help us segment that audience, especially if they're very large or they have a lot of intersecting identities that are part of it. Having conversations with those audience counselors can help us visualize and understand who it is we're really trying to reach. They can also help us build connections within those communities, right? That because they are members of those communities, they may have, relationships, roles that they play within those communities that can help us build those bridges instead of those divisions. They can help us provide insights into needs, motivations, benefits, and barriers. Those questions I said that we need to think about when we're contemplating our audiences that we're trying to reach. And then they also can help us add authenticity and credibility to the work that we do. And that's particularly important when we're speaking to overburdened communities and trying to engage them when there's huge trust issues. And so working closely with people within those communities in the actual work and letting people see that that is happening can help add authenticity and credibility to it. And then they help us with mid-course corrections and adjustment needs, as I mentioned earlier. And then they also can give us realistic setting and measuring of performance benchmarks. I think that's always a really hard part when we get to that evaluation section of those plans, is what is a realistic benchmark that we can achieve with the amount of resources we have, the time frame we have, and the goals, objectives, and audiences we're trying to reach. Audience counselors can tell us what's realistic, what makes the most sense. And that having that insight will help us achieve, set benchmarks that are really achievable and smart. And then they also can help us, be a champion and an amplifier for the work that we're doing. So once that campaign starts rolling, because they've been so invested in the work, it's going to make it easier for them to be willing to serve those roles as that campaign, as that work goes on. So lots of value. So in closing, I love this Maya Angelou quote. I use it in practically every training I do because I think people get really hung up on right and wrong, correct, incorrect. And when we're talking about DEI, right? I don't want to say the wrong thing is often a thing I hear. And this is what I really think is the whole point of us having these conversations is, she said, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better. And so when we have these conversations with our audience counselors, when we find ways to authentically bring our audience into our communications planning work, into our campaigns, and make them a partner, when we have that dance together, then we're going to gain a lot of information that's going to help us do better and minimize harm in the work that we're doing moving forward. We're not going to be perfect. No one should ever expect us to be perfect. And the line is constantly changing, especially within these communities, especially these overburdened communities. And so, no one's going to be perfect, but we can always aim to be better. So what I know for sure, this might sound familiar, Oprah Winfrey likes to do this too in her magazine, but I think it's a really great way of summarizing our conversation today. So this is what I know for sure about creating diverse, equitable, inclusive PR efforts that engage rather than divide. It's about listening to other people and yourself. It's like the quote in Hamilton, talk less, smile more. Right? Sometimes we do too much talking as communicators, and we need to stop talking and spend more time listening, because we're going to get smarter information about what we need to do and how we need to do it. And then always ask people, ask audiences where they are and what they need. This sounds like a no-brainer, but I can tell you and point to many, many campaigns where people didn't ever ask the audience they're trying to reach what they need and where they are. And if they had asked those questions, the campaign would have gone better, would have been more successful, but they left the audience out. And I'm saying, let's bring the audience in. You want to involve them from the start, and you want to demonstrate that you value their counsel. Both of those things, involve and value, very, very important. That's how you build relationships, how you build trust. Research first, then do the plan, then set the actions. I think sometimes we get excited about the strategies and tactics, particularly the tactics, and then we forget about the other two parts. But it really needs to be done in order for you to feel really confident about the campaign that you're putting forward and that it will have the best possible success. Be strategic, minimize harm whenever we can. Like I said, we're not perfect. And we don't know everything. So there's sometimes where we might you create a message that is harmful to a population or an audience or a community that we didn't intend it to be. So we need to own those things and recognize that sometimes intention doesn't matter, and then do better. Now that we have that knowledge, how do we apply that knowledge so that we don't make that error again, and find ways of continuing to minimize harm to the audiences that we're trying to reach. Always assume the presence of bias. Like I said, I've got them, you've got them, everyone's got them, regardless of their background, regardless of their experiences, even bias related to their own identity communities that they align to. So the key is do the work on kind of unpacking that for yourself, so then you have that awareness and it will help you be a better communicator. Evaluate often and always be open to change, right? The original roadmap or the original game plan might need to pivot. Things will happen in the world that you didn't anticipate were going to happen. And that's where those audience counselors can be incredibly helpful to you in kind of giving you that guidance of how to navigate when those situations occur. And then finally, keep learning. This is a lifelong learning process. I feel that way about communications in general, but in particular, I feel that way about DEI because, as I mentioned, it's constantly evolving and changing. How identity communities see themselves, experience the world is constantly in flux. And so you have to be a lifelong learner to do this work, and you have to be willing to get uncomfortable. And it's like we started in the beginning, I wanted everyone to take a deep breath, to center yourself, right? Grounding your feet on the ground for this conversation, because sometimes it can be difficult. But I think if it's too easy, we're not having the right conversation. There always needs to be a level of discomfort, a level of feeling like, oh, man, do I really want to talk about this? To get us to the right places and to have the right conversations. So there's a lot of resources. I did want to share that we're going to follow up this presentation and share a PDF of this slide deck. So you don't have to be furiously writing all these things down, but I wanted to share some of the resources I've found really helpful in doing this work, and especially in understanding how to communicate and navigate certain, engage certain identity communities, as well as resources to use to kind of deepen your understanding of your own bias, as well as the bias of other people. And so, check these out. It could be really helpful. I'd love to get connected. So if you have, we're going to take some time to do some questions that Dr. Hernandez is going to lead us through. But please, let's get connected on LinkedIn. And I'd love to help and counsel people if this is a topic that you're interested in or you have questions about, but maybe not feel comfortable to talk about in a public meeting such as this. Let's get connected and be happy to talk about that. All right, questions?
So can you hear me?
We can.
Excellent. All right, thank you so much. So this is a lot of great information. I know I have several questions, but I'll let the audience go first. So we have one from Rachel. It is, how do you recommend starting those conversations with audiences in a new community? If I start a position, I want to embrace those communities and audiences that are new to me. What would that look like?
So I think one of the best ways to do that, and thank you for the question, one of the best ways to do that is thinking about the audience you're trying to reach. Are there existing organizations that are working within that community, right? Like providing, whether it's providing services to that community, or it's an organization that represents members of that community. Starting with those groups can be really the best gateway in. One, because it gives you a lot of information, but I will say that you need to be prepared to kind of really be able to articulate what it is that you are trying to accomplish and what your expectations are for engaging those audience counselors from that community. So you want to be as transparent as possible so then everybody is on the same page as to what that engagement is, because that organization person might tell you, you know what, that is not an appropriate use of people in the community. Like they might find that offensive. They might, you know, not be able to have the time or inclination to be a part of it. So sometimes talking to an organization that's already invested in a community can give you a lot of intel about how to create those bridges.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, you had mentioned, you had alluded to budget. First of all, Leah said this has been fantastic, so thank you. They also said, I'm curious of strategies to get audience counselors to volunteer their time when you have limited resources and budget in a nonprofit space. And then I'll ask the second part of the question after.
Okay. Well, the first part of the question, that is incredibly true. And I think there is a movement within the NGO space in particular about acknowledging community members as experts and treating them as we would treat a subject matter expert, like say, like from a university, like from Johns Hopkins, you would compensate them in some way, right? But compensation doesn't always have to be monetary. Compensation could be other kinds of benefits, other kinds of access, or privileges that you can provide that doesn't cost anything, but gives that individual a sense that their time is valued and appreciated. Sometimes it can be as simple as giving someone a title, you know, like forming an advisory council and asking them to sit on an advisory council. That can be an incredible thing to add to a resume, to be able to share with other people, like, hey, I'm working on this advisory council. But then also, you know, keeping in mind, if you're not compensating them with money, to be able to compensate, be clear about the expectations. So we're only going to ask, you know, 4 hours a month of your time, and then really keep to that, right? Like it is a promise and like a contract. So those are some of the ways to do that, where it doesn't necessarily require monetary compensation. You find other things that would be of value to them, that they would feel that they are being appreciated and valued. What's the second part of the question?
Is any strategies for providing accessible communications to multilingual virtual audiences? We have internal audiences with limited tech resources, for example, internet access issues, and I'm always looking for creative ways to reach them.
Yeah, that is always a really tricky challenge to navigate around, particularly when you're dealing with communities that are experiencing that digital divide and not having those kind of technology resources that we really rely upon to do that heavy lifting for us. So I think one of the ways is to try to figure out how you can do in person. And sometimes you need to do in person by proxy. Like, for example, you may not be able to travel, or colleagues may not be able to travel, but partnering with an organization that's already based in that community, like I was talking about earlier, and having them host something where you provide them with all the resources of like the facilitator guide, you know, whatever you need to have those conversations and to reach those individuals. Maybe even cover the interpretation cost of having a live interpreter. You know, thinking through what are things you could do maybe in collaboration or partnership with another organization when you're having those kind of digital challenges, and doing more things in person. I know conference calls are still a valuable thing, and especially where we have so many diverse communities using WhatsApp. That's also an option to look at, but you still would most likely have to engage either native speakers or professional interpreters to kind of help translate the content in those spaces. But, you know, looking at what they do have access for and then coming up with some creative solutions could be helpful.
Does anyone have any questions? Jocelyn has questions. See if you're gonna come now. Hello.
Hi.
My name's Jocelyn. I do have a question because I'm a student kind of on the other side of this conversation. So I want to ask, as a person of color, oftentimes I feel like I can be the only person or the only few people of color in a professional setting. So how can I feel like I'm not the token, or, you know, I'm not experiencing imposter syndrome? That happens to me in a professional setting a lot, and I wonder how I can navigate that.
So that is a fantastic question. Thank you for asking. And just to say that I too have felt that way too many occasions. And it's very difficult when you feel like you are the voice of one to represent a community, and everyone expects that you're going to be like able to say, well, this is how you engage, in my case, Black women, you know, and da 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 da. So a couple things that I share, and I actually vocalize in those meeting conversations. One, I remind everyone that the communities we're talking about are not monoliths, and I might have an experience as this identity community, but my experience is not the only experience. And actually, sometimes, to be funny, I say, you know, I'm not the Lorax. I don't speak for the trees. Like, I don't speak for all Black women. I don't, right? Like, my experience is very singular to this. And while I might have relations or connections to what is being discussed or the challenges that we're trying to overcome using communications, we still need to do research. We still need to go to those specific communities. And I can offer some insights on how we frame that based on my own experience. But my experience is not the definitive experience for the audience that we're trying to reach. And I will say that earlier in my career, when those conversations would happen, I would just assume that I needed to do that I needed to speak for the group. And I did. And it wasn't the right way to do it. And I've learned now that I am empowered to be able to remind everybody in a very constructive way that we need to do more work, and we can't rely on our individual experiences to define how we reach a group of people, and that it still requires research, and that we can give some insights based on our own personal experience of how to do that research and where to find it. But we should start feeling more empowered to be able to have those conversations and redirect those conversations. And it's not offensive. It's making the work stronger. And anytime someone has challenged me on that, I've always said that if we just base it on our own perspective, anybody's perspective in this room, it's not going to be successful. The goal is to be successful. We need more intelligence. We need deeper understanding of this group as a group of people than just one individual's experience. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Okay, so right now I'm teaching theory of mass communication, and today we're discussing cultivation theory. And so, like, you've been in your role for 17 years, and it's shifted. But how have you seen the media play a role in how we're having this dialogue about DEI or even the various campaigns over the years?
Yeah, I think that at its core, so like thinking of, core things that direct this industry, like AP Style Guide, for example, and other things that are kind of core foundations for media, that we're seeing a huge shift in being really attentive and thoughtful about how we are talking about identity community, how we're even talking about identity, period, how we talk about historic and structural racism and things like that. So there's definitely like a thoughtfulness, but in the newsroom, it's slow, right? Like we're still seeing, and you could just see just from the last 2 weeks of the coverage of what's happening between Israel and Hamas, like that the media is struggling. They're really struggling on how to do this well, right? And they have resources that can guide them on how to do this. But like I said at the beginning, the DEI stuff is personal, right? we have our own personal experiences, we have our own personal worldviews, and as a reporter, that is still influencing, that bias is still influencing the way that we do reporting. And so I think that there's been great progress made, but I think there's still a lot of work to do, partly because not enough of us are kind of doing this introspection, this kind of heavy lifting to kind of unpack what some of those things are that could be influencing the way we develop reporting, the way that we tell the story, the vantage point in which we tell the story from. I think one of the things I would love to see change quickly, if possible, is who is telling the story, and really bringing people in to tell their own story instead of us talking to them and telling them what their story is. We need to do a better job of bringing those people to the forefront, who are willing. Obviously can't force people to do it, but people who are willing to share, we should be willing to give them the platforms and the spaces, particularly in news media, for them to tell their own story as opposed to us telling them what their story is.
Yeah, great. Appreciate that. I know we're coming up on the end of our time, and so I want to thank everyone for attending, and special thanks to Crystal. And I have to tell a small anecdote. When I invited her to do this talk, we offer a very small stipend, but her first question was, can I donate it? And she always wants to give back. So I appreciate your generosity as well.
Thank you. Well, it's all about paying it forward. And I know there are a lot of people that helped me along my career and gotten me to the point that I'm in here, who were incredibly generous and kind with their time and their insights. And so I'm always happy to pay that forward for the future communicators. So really happy to be a part of this conversation today.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thank you.